like a dog.
My.
So I don't care if people aren't standing around to hear, because I know everything we do, everything we say, somebody is being touched.
Yes.
You all heard my story. I don't need to share my story again. You know that I'm here because I come from 4 generations of mothers and daughters. I am here today because I have a little baby girl named Promise. But it's just not my story and 3-year-old Promise story why I stand here today. I stand here today and I plan to stand in every mall that I can get to over the next coming months, every Saturday, because of that woman who lay in the middle of that street just hours ago. I stand here today because of all the stories that we hear. And I want to stand here today and I want to remind you of a few right here in our DC metropolitan area. I want to share the story of 3 women that you might have heard, whose voice, whose name, and whose story was nothing more than a story on our local news. I want to start first by sharing that on May 3rd, 2010, Yardley Love was found face down in a pool of blood with head trauma. George Hughley, her ex-boyfriend, later waived his Miranda rights and told the police the graphic details of assaulting Love, stating that he kicked open her locked door and shook her and hit her head against the wall repeatedly. Yardley's mother would later hold a funeral for her daughter, attended by over 2,000 mourners, while George Hughley will later be charged with her murder. I don't have a candle for Yardley today, but what I would ask you to do is to join me in acknowledging and honoring her by something I call Say Her Name. I want to say Yardley Love's name, and I want you to join me in saying her name. Please join me as I say Yardley Love.
Yardley Love.
On October 13, 2005, many of you heard this horrific story on our local news. It was one that we could not have ever imagined happening. It was the story of Roger Hargrave, Yvette Kay's husband, whom she was legally separated from since December 2004. When he walked into the crowded T-Mobile store in Clinton, Maryland, where Yvette worked, doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. Half of Yvette's upper body, including her entire face, 3rd-degree burns on most of her body, was at serious level, to say the least. 3 weeks prior to this incident, a Prince George County judge, Richard Palumbo, dismissed the protective order that Kay had against her husband, despite telling that judge that he was violent. I want you to join me today in saying her name. Please join me as I say Yvette Kay.
Yvette Kay.
And finally, I want to remind you that domestic violence don't just affect our adults. It's our small children like Promise who it affects as well. And these 3 little children were little promises. Because in March 2008, Mark Anthony Castillo in Baltimore City was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 6 counts of child abuse after he called the desk at the Baltimore Marriott Inner Harbor and said he had just killed his 3 children. Anthony was 6, Austin was 4, and Athena was only 2. He had told his wife, who told the judge that he was going to kill the children. And the judge still gave him visitation rights. Well, he would later take those 3 children to a Baltimore City hotel and drown them in the bathtub. Chilling words that foreshadowed the death of those 3 children appeared in a court petition for a protective order that was filed by his estranged wife. Those chilling words were the words of his wife, who had told the judge that he told her he was going to kill their children. She wrote, "He has never actually hurt the children, but he did tell me that the worst thing he could do to me would be to kill our children. And that would be what would hurt her enough and allow her to know that she could not live without her children." I want to take a minute and say Anthony and Austin and Athena's name. Please join me in saying Anthony.
Anthony.
Please join me in saying 6-year-old Austin.
Austin.
And join me in saying 2-year-old Athena.
Athena.
It is these stories, Anthony, Austin, and Athena. It is these stories, my grandmother, my mother, myself, and my daughter. And it is these stories, 3-year-old little Promise, whose life is in jeopardy every time they are involved in an abusive relationship. So I don't care that we don't have mounds of people standing around, because I know it is these stories that perhaps one person walking by will hear. It is those tips that Rebecca reminded us of that they will hear. It is Denise's story, who came up and shared her survival of drug addiction and domestic violence. It is the panelists who stood today and answered all the questions that we don't talk about. And it is all of you who I know have your own very stories. So as I close today, I ask you to let those stories remind you that our story is America's story. And let those stories provoke you to change. A promise for change. A call to action. That we must talk about it. Thank you.
Wow.